Content warning. This episode contains discussion of the murder of 2 girls, as well as predatory voyeurism.
We would like to begin this episode with a request we've made before. We know that this podcast reaches a large number of people who live in Peru, Indiana. People who know Tony Kline, or his son, Kegan Kline. If you know the Klines, and have any stories you want to share with us about your experiences with them, please send us an email at murdersheet@gmail.com. And if you want to be anonymous, don't worry. We protect our sources.
In some of our recent episodes, we've covered upsetting developments in the investigation into the Delphi murders. In case you've wondered, if people tell us things that seem significant or sensitive, we share those details with law enforcement, and also ask if it would hurt the investigation if we reported them here. There are items they have asked us to hold back on, and we have agreed to do so. We have gotten their go-ahead to reveal an intriguing detail we have heard from multiple people. We will share that in this episode, as well as a talk with one of Tony Kline's classmates and a letter we received from Kegan Kline himself. My name is Anya Kane.
And I'm Kevin Greenlee.
And this is The Murder Sheet, a weekly true crime podcast.
Anya and I connected over the Burger Chef murders, a 1978 unsolved case involving the killings of 4 young restaurant employees. We're The Murder Sheet, and this is The Delphi Murders. Who was Tony Kline? Part 3. During the course of our reporting, we have been told by multiple people that Tony Kline had a reputation in high school as being a peeping Tom. Multiple people have described to us one particularly disturbing peeping Tom incident involving Tony Kline. On this occasion, he was alleged to have been looking at a sleeping female through an open window.
But that apparently wasn't enough for Tony Kline. Our sources told us that Kline got a stick, stuck it inside the window, and used it to push up the nightgown of his unconscious victim. It's an incredibly disturbing incident. A young man seemingly unsatisfied with simply spying, one who became willing to go even further to dehumanize and humiliate his victim.
It is worth noting that peeping Tom, or voyeuristic types of behavior, also can escalate. In an article in Psychology Today, Wendy L. Patrick discussed research that suggests this sort of crime can be a gateway to much more serious offenses. Anya will read an excerpt from that informative piece, and we'll include a link to the complete article in our show notes.
Voyeurism requires objectification, and is predatory in nature because it involves watching someone without the person's knowledge or consent. Research demonstrates a link between voyeurism and crime. A significant percentage of criminals who commit sexual assaults report a history of voyeurism or exhibitionism. Overlapping sexual deviations coupled with an escalation in behavior lend support to a model of sexual addiction, recognizing that such addiction usually involves multiple compulsive behaviors as opposed to only one type.
This is upsetting enough on its own, but of course it may take on special significance in this case. In the police transcript we released last month, investigators discussed a rather terrifying incident. After a young woman gave her address to someone using the Anthony Schatz account, she arrived home on a school bus and discovered a man wearing a ski mask peering into her bedroom window.
Moving on, we would like to share with you a conversation we had with a woman we will call Erin. That's not her real name. She comes from Peru, Indiana, where Tony Kline lives. She shared with us a disturbing story about an experience she had with Kline. We were able to corroborate information she gave us. But we wanted to start our chat by getting some background on the city of Peru itself. Most of us, after all, don't know much about what the community itself is like. For people who are outsiders, what is Peru, Indiana like?
It's a very small knit community. Most of the people here, I would say they've lived here for a long time, and generally you either have two types of people who are from Peru. They either stay here forever or they get out their first chance and never come back. So for me, I'm obviously one of the long-term residents. My family was raised here. So, it's a pretty, for me, it's about raising my kids here. Small town, it's pretty safe, I always thought. Of course, under these circumstances, I'm learning that it might not be as safe as what I thought. We have had, in the past couple of years, kind of a growing trend of some more gun violence and things like that have been happening in the community. So it has changed a little bit. I don't think that people are as comfortable with, their kids necessarily taking off blocks away and playing at parks like they used to. So I think we've kind of, just in today's day and age, you kind of have to kind of curb that a little bit and make sure that you're protecting your children. But for the most part, for my family, we've always been into sports. It's an athletic community. People are very involved with the school corporations between the three Miami County schools. So I'd like to say we're pretty tight-knit group. Like, a lot of people know each other.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
When she was a teenager, Erin was a member of the Peru Deb Batons, a large group that twirled batons at various events. Erin told us about her history with the group.
So back, and I'm not sure when it started. For me, it was a family event. My aunts were involved in it. And so my mother had put me in it when I was about 4 years old. And it was pretty much a growing trend then in the 80s. It's not something that is around anymore, but it lasted for several years. It was a pretty big core group. So we had like the large core, and then we had a small core, and we competed all over the state of Indiana, sometimes in Ohio, and even Michigan. We went to different contests. So the families that were involved in that were, most of them were rather close. Now,
Tony Kline's sister was also a member of the group, but she was several years older than Erin, and so the two young women were not close. But Erin's aunts knew Tony's sister better, and so, as a result, when the Peru Deb Batons went to contests and such, the families would sometimes travel together.
We would go on stayaways at different hotels, and I don't remember anything specific about him at that time, because I really didn't. I guess I knew the family more, his mom and his sister, and knew of him, but he, like I said, was older, so the families knew each other. And so my best friend happened to live basically right behind the Kline residence when they grew up. And it was over across town from where I live. But I spent a lot of time there. I pretty much grew up there and spent lots of weekends at my best friend's house at sleepovers, and then she would come over and stay at my house as well. So we knew of him in the area, but really weren't necessarily friends with him.
Right. And it sounds like there was that distance where it's like, okay, we're not really super familiar with Tony Kline, but do you remember anything like in a small town of people saying anything about like what he was like or what his family was like?
The family was always considered rather nice and prominent. You know, they lived in a really nice house. It was very kept up, you know, as far as the upkeep. I noticed recently, obviously, they don't live there anymore, so it doesn't look the same, obviously, over the years of the wear and tear. But at the time, you know, they were a prominent family. People knew of them. But really what I had heard really about him is I knew he was some friends with some other guys at school that I knew of. And so he, I think, might have been on the football team. I believe, so he was rather popular, and people knew of him. And really my feelings about him before the incident was really just kind of neutral, like, because I really didn't know a whole lot. I just knew of him.
Right. I'm from a small town too, and there were people like that where be like, okay, like he seems fine, like whatever. Like I'm not thinking about this person that much, even though I know of him.
Right. Yeah. Until something happens, and then you're like, wow, that was odd.
The incident Erin is about to describe likely took place in 1986, and forever after changed her opinion of Tony Kline.
I'm pretty sure I've narrowed it down to 86. So I would have been a freshman in high school and he would have been a senior. And I was walking home from school one day. I was also a cheerleader. And this particular day, I was in my cheerleading uniform, which I'm not someone who's super, obviously I had to wear it when I was supposed to wear it, but I'm not someone who wears skirts a lot otherwise. So that's what made it a little kind of more odd. But I happened to notice that as I was walking home, I'm always pretty aware of my surroundings. I was always kind of taught to be. And I actually, my job that I work in, I have to be now even more aware of my surroundings. And on this particular day, I kind of just got this weird feeling that, you know, someone was following me. And so basically I turned around and I did see this guy a couple blocks back. And I didn't think a whole lot of it. It just was, you know, again, just being aware that there was someone there. And then I just kind of kept walking. But, you know, my house is probably about 7 to 8 city, or I guess town. I don't want to say city blocks because, you know, cities have larger blocks, but about 7 or 8 town blocks away from the high school. And so as I was approaching my neighborhood, I looked up ahead and I happened to see this movement behind some shrubs and bushes across the street from my house. And when I took a closer look, I realized that it was the same individual that was following, like that was behind me a few blocks earlier. And so it was really odd. It really, it kind of, you know, immediately creeped me out. And I immediately dodged and went across the street, because had I kept walking, I would have been walking right by those bushes. But I went ahead and as I approached the alley, I went ahead and cut across to my side of the street and kept my eye on that area without trying to, I guess, bring too much light to it until I got to my house, because it was super creepy. And as the person saw me see him, which turned out to be Tony, I knew exactly who it was as I got closer to him, because I knew of him and what he looked like. He ducked down even further and kind of hid behind he kind of moved as I moved to keep hidden behind the bushes and the tree that was there. And as I got on the porch, I remembered just, you know, I'm at home, I'm safe, my mom was inside. And so I kind of hollered across the street basically and said, you know, I see you, you creep, and called his name out and said, you know, you better go or I'm going to tell my parents and they're going to call the police. And he ended up ditching, you know, quickly he bolted and took off, and I don't even remember which direction. He just was gone. But it was just super, it was just really unbelievable. I was like, why was he over here? What was he doing? I hadn't really had any moments like where we were ever in an area that we were like, hi, I'm introducing myself and what's your name? We hadn't had any time that we had ever spoke or talked. So it's like, other than the baton situation and living near my best friend, I mean, he might have known who we were, I guess, just because he could have been, at the contest or, in the neighborhood when we would practice outside sometimes. But like, definitely, how did he know where I lived? We weren't friends. We didn't hang in the same circles. And I mean, I even was someone who had lots of like birthday parties with inviting lots of like community friends from batons and from softball and from other things that I was involved in. And he was never one of them. So it was just super creepy. And, my mom was appalled by it, of course, because again, she knew the family and my aunt knew the sister. And so we never said really anything to anybody other than like our friends. But yeah, that was pretty much the gist of it. And then anytime at school after that point, if I saw him, we had our freshman hallway, our junior hallway, and so on and so forth. And I would avoid, like if I saw him in a hallway, I would turn and go the other way. I didn't want anything. It just was creepy. It was like, why was he ducked down hiding in the bushes as I'm walking home, coincidentally in my cheerleading uniform? It just was I felt very uncomfortable. And it was very weird.
I mean, that's like a really, really creepy image of a senior kid following a kid like that.
Right.
I mean,
and then, yeah, definitely. And then later, my husband went to the same school, and he's older than Tony. And he said to me, he's like, do you remember like hearing the rumors? Because we had heard rumors later that he had gotten caught peeping in women's windows. And he kind of had a nickname of a peeping Tom. And, he said, my husband said, I kind of remember vaguely them talking about a police report, but maybe it never got, like, no charges were ever filed against him. And I don't know if there's a report out there or not saying any of that, but we heard it definitely in the community. And so it was, for me, when I had seen the picture of Kegan and all of those charges and everything, and that he was from Miami County, I was like, oh, Kline, I wonder if he's related to Tony. And then finding out that it was his dad, I was like, oh my gosh, that kind of, to me, kind of makes sense, because Tony was a super creeper. Like, hearing all of these things about the peeping Tom and the incident that happened with me, I was like, wow. Yeah, it was definitely, I wasn't necessarily shocked, I guess, of the incident with his son. Like, thinking of those kind of sexual stuff, it didn't surprise me.
Right. And I'm curious, when you were in high school or during this time, did you or your husband remember Tony ever dating anybody in particular, or like, oh yeah, he's going with her or something like that?
No. I don't. And, actually I was talking to someone today, and she would have been at the same year. She would have graduated the same year as him, and she didn't even realize he was married at one point. Like, she didn't even know that. So no, I never remember seeing him with anyone. And again, it wasn't like I was, before this incident happened, like I said, I just kind of like, he was just someone that I knew his name. But then after the incident, he was someone I avoided. So I didn't really pay attention to anything going on in his life at that point, other than just hearing the rumors that I heard after we graduated.
Of course, whenever we speak with people who know either Tony or Kegan Kline, there are certain questions we simply must ask.
Does he look like Bridge Guy to you, or does he sound like Bridge Guy?
Of course, I don't remember his voice because it's been way too many years. But I did think the first sketch, no, I don't think that really looks like I don't even know where that one came from. But the second one, to me, when I look at that, if I cover the curly hair a little bit, but I see his Tony's features and his smirk and the way that he holds his mouth when he is taking pictures, because I've seen a lot of his profile pictures on Facebook. He still honestly looks a lot like he did. He's actually, his face to me looks a little thinner than what it was during part of our high school years, but because it's kind of longer. But I think that the second one does a little bit. I see a resemblance there.
And what about the image of the guy walking on the bridge that's been released? It's obviously blurry, but do you see any of Tony in that, or does that not look like
Yeah, I don't necessarily, just because I don't remember any specifics to like the way he walked or how he stood or anything like that. It was just more of what his face looked like for me. So I don't necessarily, I mean, I can't say that I can't rule it out, but I can't say that I think it definitely looks like him either.
Absolutely. And then, with the rumors about him being a peeping Tom and there being maybe a police report, do you ever have like any memories of like who he would have been peeping on or any information?
No, I wish that I had, but it was just, for me, as soon as I heard it, it was believable. It wasn't just a rumor in my head, because this was pretty much that's what could have happened to me in this circumstance. Like, had I not seen him and been aware of my surroundings, he may have done the same thing. We have a fence around our home, but what was he there for otherwise? And so who knows? And then when I heard about it, I was like, wow, yeah, I totally could see that.
Right.
But no, I don't know any names, unfortunately.
You think that if it was just like something silly, like it would just been like, oh, I was just trying to scare you or something, like instead of running away.
Oh, no, I definitely don't feel, I didn't feel that. I didn't feel like it was silly. I felt like it was intentional, and I felt like it was creepy. Like, I felt uncomfortable from it. And then when I heard the other stories, I was like, yeah, definitely. If I had not called him out, who knows, he could have ended up in the yard. I could have been one of those, rumored people.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I didn't feel it was silly for me. It was enough for me to avoid him, and I wasn't someone who avoided people. I was pretty sociable. I had a lot of friends. So for him, it was creepy for me. So I just avoided him. If ever I saw him, I would go the other way. I just didn't want to be around him.
We want to thank Erin for taking the time to share her story with us. It is worth highlighting that both the story she tells about her own experience and what she related about the Peeping Tom incidents both fall under the category of non-contact sexual offenses. We have seen other instances of that sort of behavior in Tony Kline's criminal history. We are thinking especially of him repeatedly calling at least 2 women and making sexual noises after they picked up the phone. And, of course, Kegan Kline's history of tricking young girls on the internet into providing him with sexual pictures of themselves would also fall into the category of non-contact sexual offenses.
Speaking of the younger Kline, people have often asked us if we have tried to get an interview with Kegan Kline. We have. Shortly after we released the transcript of Kegan Kline's interview with HLN, we wrote him a letter asking if we could arrange a time to come and do a video interview with him. We told him we wanted to hear his story. Kevin will read the letter he wrote back to us.
I appreciate your letter and getting the transcript released, though after reading it, I was not very happy due to how some of my quick answers were perceived in writing. I'm answering your letter in writing due to the fact I have no other way of talking. My lawyer advised me against video visits due to how my last one went. I am, however, open to answering any questions you may have for me through letters. As for my story, I wouldn't really say I have one. I'm just another person the police or state police wrongly accuse of a crime. Happens daily in the world. I do not want any bad publicity on my name. There is way too much as it is. I look forward to your letter and reply. Thanks a lot, Kegan Kline.
It's interesting to note that Kegan Kline seems well aware that he did not come across well in that interview, and that he seemed to think he could potentially come off better in an interview where he could take time to carefully craft out written answers. It is also worth highlighting that, despite the enormous amount of evidence against him on the child sexual abuse materials charges, that Kegan Kline claims, without offering any evidence, that he was wrongfully accused. If he has a story that explains away all the incriminating information out there, or if he has a tale that could plausibly point the finger at someone else, then we would be very interested in hearing it. And we are sure you would be too.
So, after receiving this letter, we immediately wrote a reply to Kegan Kline in which we asked him some initial, basic questions. Despite him saying he would be open to answering us, he has yet to reply. We very much hope he will ultimately choose to do so.
To our surprise, we've gotten a number of requests from people saying they would like a way to help financially support our efforts with the show. So, if you are interested, we are relaunching a Patreon page, which you can find at www.patreon.com/murdersheet. Join us there for 2 live video question and answer sessions each month. You can ask us anything, suggest new cases for us to look at, or even offer ideas for new leads for us to follow. If Patreon is not your thing, you can buy us a coffee at www.buymeacoffee.com/murdersheet. Thanks for the interest.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Murder Sheet. As always, thanks to Kevin Tyler Greenlee, who composed the music for The Murder Sheet, and who you can find on the web at kevintg.com.
To keep up with the latest on The Murder Sheet, please make sure to follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Murder Sheet, and on Facebook at MSheet Podcast, or by searching Murder Sheet. If you enjoy listening to The Murder Sheet, please leave us a 5-star review to help us gain more exposure. And send tips, suggestions, and feedback to murdersheet@gmail.com. Thanks so much for listening.